So, good morning. First of all, I would like to mention that the slides are online. I am PhD student. My name is José Luis Santos. I am working in the Human-Computer Interaction Group at KU Leuven. It's a university from Belgium. And now I want to explain a bit about our paper, that it was goal-oriented visualizations of activity tracking, a case study with engineering students. So what was our main motivation when we started this work? We wanted to use information visualization as a means for providing awareness to the students that they could self-reflect to understand what is going on and give a bit of sense-making on this information. But even more important, because we have to accept that there are a lot of work done in this area, and we are even more interested to how engage the students to this process of reflection and getting conclusions and modify somehow the behavior of the user. Another point is that our courses are not done, or they are not inside of one LMS. So also another important part of our research was how to track the information or the activities that go outside of the LMS. As a related work, we can say that we want to positionate this work inside of a bit of the dashboards that we can find in the learning management systems, not only because, it's even more important because we don't do sense-making in the way that we give an idea on if they will succeed or something like that. It was more important from the perspective of the design. We want that if the users get used to use some dashboards, we want to use more or less the same criteria for the design. Also, we positionate a bit our work in the way that the students should reflect on during the process of the activity. So they should see what is their activity. For instance, in the first case, Narcissus, it's about project management. Also, it's a really pretty close case study from us. Also, that I think after the next session, the other session, our colleagues from the University Carlos III of Madrid will present the other tool that is GLASS. Also, it's visualizing network activity of the users inside or outside of the LMS, but inside of a virtual machine. And finally, another fellows from Italy that they visualize basically activity more than success or learning. But what is our previous work? We did also the student activity meter that was also visualizing time spent per activity. And the other tool that was really important for us, because it was a really first stage that we did, and we presented in our workshop, and they told us that it was more or less nice, but it's really important when we see a visualization that we know the context that we are visualizing, because otherwise it's really difficult to understand what is going on. Also, as an inspiration, I just forgot to mention that as a conclusion of this kind of context, we wanted to use this concept of goals. Goals may be not so oriented like learning goals. It's more maybe oriented in this quantified self approach that we have. It's that the user can say, okay, I want to be more active in this kind of activity. Because of that, I want to achieve these goals, but more oriented to the activity. We are more focused on the process than not in the final goal, learning goal. For that, we use the design-based research methodology. Maybe this methodology is a bit different because we don't start with big research questions, but it's a really good opportunity to get early feedback, earlier requirements from the students, and it's based on that. We have a problem, we try to design an application, we implement it, we deploy it with the students, we try to observe, evaluate what is going on. Also, the good part is that we are also teachers or teacher assistants from these courses, so we also see how the students are performing. And finally, we try to analyze all this data, we try to find somehow correlations, and finally we get some kind of requirements for the next iteration of the tool. So in that case, we did 4 iterations. In fact, we did 5, but in the paper are included only 4. And basically, we start with the typical paper prototype. We design something, we evaluate it in that case, because we cannot go to the students and ask them, what do you need, what are your requirements, because they even don't know what is going on in the course, what will be the objectives. It's difficult to get this information. So we go a step ahead, that is the digital prototype. Also, we evaluated with teachers and professors. We did a first release that we evaluated with the students, and finally also a second release that also is with the students and their data. That is the most important thing. In the first and second iteration, as we didn't know also where we want to use it, we use a generic approach. We use the contextualized attention metadata specification, and we try to design a dashboard for that. We evaluate in these iterations the usability based on interviews and think aloud protocol between 15 and 30 minutes. In the first was 7 participants. In the second, 5 participants. And in the previous slide was already mentioned, was basically focused on teachers and teacher assistants. What were the conclusions? That, for instance, as we can see in the previous slide, just the first widget was a table. A table is a really nice visualization for getting an overview of what is going on in all the class, but all the course, but yes, when the size is increasing of the students, or for instance, in that case of the goals, the table that also, it's something that happens in the Khan Academy, you get somehow lost in this kind of visualization. Also, we have to take care, because we were using the approach of visualization, widgets, that we shouldn't use or we shouldn't visualize redundant information in different visualizations, because the user, what is expecting is that if I have 2 visualizations are different information. So somehow it's important to take this into consideration. Also, the personalization. Not everybody has the same background with personalization. We are dealing with students, and most of them, they are not get used to reflect on visualization. So they spend sometimes quite time for trying to understand this kind of information. So personalization is important. Context centralization versus diversification. It means that as we were using widget technology, that also was something that we decide when was personalization, because in a widget container you can modify your widget that you want to add in your dashboard and so on. So every widget should contain what is the context of himself. Yes, and the final point is the motion chart, that it seems that in the literature you can find that the motion chart, it's a really nice visualization for visualizing 3-dimensional data information, but it's some of them, I mean, that also I was commenting before, for personalization is one of the visualizations that can have problems for students to understand it, because they are not really got used to this kind of visualization. So once that we did these 2 iterations. We decided to go for a real scenario, a real course for doing this kind of process. Again, we wanted that, the setup of the course was a programming course that they had to develop and program a code, a new program. We defined a really simple approach now because it was a first stage of our research, that it was goals. We had 2 goals. It was first report and second report, that it was the final report. And the idea, basically, they had to work in groups, so also they should they should learn how they spend during the lab sessions, their time during the lab session, trying to compare with their peers or something like that. So as engineering students, they have to learn not only to program code, and they don't only have to learn Java or so on. They have also to learn how to manage their time, what are the problems, and so on. Even more important also to choose maybe the peers of their groups, because when they go to the professional world, they have to have success. Why and what do we track? As I said, individual and group spend time. We track all the activity that happens in the desktop of the computer. We have to say also that we track all the activity more or less in an anonymous way, because we create special accounts for this course and we provide it to the students, like user1.group1@gmail.com or something like that. And then we give it to the students and create accounts in Rescue Time. Rescue Time, it's an application for tracking time in desktops. And also we track with Eclipse. Eclipse is an development environment, so how much time they spend in the different files of the project, what kind of activity that they were doing, like development, writing, and so on. The type of activity was provided also for Rescue Time by Rescue Time, that they have their own taxonomy for classifying all the applications. So they infer this information from what kind of application you were using. And the application itself, how much time do you spend in the application, and websites, and also the time spent on the different files of your project. So how do we visualize this data? Also, I have to mention that yes, this project, this research is involved in one European project, that all the code is open source, and you have it in SourceForge. And also, yes, a bit below you have the main screen, that are the 8 widgets that we did. But one per one, it's, for instance, goals on a table. We have here, as I said, really simple approach, that 2 goals, first report and second report. We have the students. And then this is the overview that, this is one of the widgets that when the student access to our dashboard, he can see. But he can see his activity and the activity of the others. So all these visualizations are interactive, so you can click on them, and then all the other widgets are modified based on this information. Here, now are everything green, because everything was passed the course. So, but the idea is that we were using 3 colors: red if the goal has not started, blue color is that the goal is going on, and the green is something that already passed. So basically, in that case, goal means first report, and you have a starting time and a final time. The motion chart, that also we talk about it. Basically, it was to compare their activity with the average activity of the group during the time. Also, you could click on the final report and first report and you could filter this data in the following widgets. So here is, in that case, the evolution of your activity in the different kind of activities that you have done along the time. And then the next is the same information, more or less, but compare it with your group. So in that case, the information that shows is that the time that you have spent in the different activities compared with the total time that your group has spent. So in that way, you can see more or less what is your contribution to your group. In that case, also is concretely the activities that you have done. I mean, the applications that you have used. Here you have, for instance, also the comparison again, but per applications. Finally, it's the time spent on your Eclipse documents and websites, also compared with your peers. Also, for instance, in that case, in this case, we can see that even one was working with Facebook during the class. The first evaluation with real data was just at the beginning of the course. Was real data, but was a bit fake, because what we did is tracking our own activity inside of the group, and then visualize it, did a demo with the students. We wanted to evaluate what is the perceived usefulness, what is the perceived usability of our application, and also, even more important, what were the privacy concerns, because we were tracking in their computer all the information, so maybe they were a bit scared about that. So we wanted to evaluate it. And what were the conclusions? For instance, in the case of the widgets, we can see that the average is more or less the same. They don't have any kind of preference at that moment of what they consider that it's better, the widget, or one or another. Also, it's normal because they still can't reflect on their own activity. So we did this kind of use questionnaire for the students, and we can conclude that the perceived usefulness was good. They consider it that they could, that it can help them during the course. And regarding the privacy concerns, they say that, okay, they are okay with the lab tracking, they don't have any problem, but we try to ask them, that is the final question, if they would agree to be tracked, for instance, in the case of being at home. And for sure they say no. In the second evaluation was after 4 lab sessions. We did it with a small group, compare it with the other one. It was with 10 students. We let them play with the application during 15 minutes. And afterwards they should, and they fill it in a SUS questionnaire, and several questions regarding perceived usefulness. And again, if they agree with tracking a perceived, if they agree or they feel uncomfortable with privacy concerns. And everything was, again, with a questionnaire. So the SUS result was 72, that they say that it was quite, if you see the scale of this kind of questionnaire, 72 is that the usability is quite good. Usefulness, they were still a bit saying, okay, I am not totally convinced about the usefulness, but they could understand everything in the visualizations, and even they could understand certain patterns of how they were managing the use of the applications. Regarding the evaluation of the widgets, we see that there are mainly two widgets that they are more considered useful. And basically are those that you can compare your activity with your peers. So it means that somehow they are more interested to reflect on, I don't know if the reflection should be the correct word, but trying to know if the others are working or not. Final conclusions that this iteration was not included in the paper, but was with 14 students. We did again the SUS questionnaire. The usability of this application decreased a bit from 72 to 66. It was a bit disappointing, but still is considered useful. It was at the end of the course, so now they have all the information that they have generated. Also, we have the graph that compares basically what was the difference between the answers from the previous iteration to this one. And our personal conclusion is that basically the usability also decreased a bit because there was more information included in the dashboard. So for them, it was a bit more difficult to understand all the problems. Also, we asked them because, okay, maybe it's a problem that they feel a bit scared with that this is more useful for teachers than for students, and maybe it's the thing that maybe they have problems on. Our results was that 6 students say that was more useful for teachers than for them, but the positive side was that students says that for 5 students they say that was more useful for students, and 3 say for both. So we have more than 50% saying that can be useful for students. So it's not something bad. And I think that is positive. And the level of satisfaction was 4.4, that, okay, was not great, but yes, I think that they can have a really good use of this kind of application. But we have the problem. Although they consider it useful, understandable, usable, the real stage is that we didn't force to them to use the application, so they could go and access to that, and the results is what they didn't use a lot, this kind of tool. Why? One student said that we had other priorities, and it's partially true. I mean, they don't realize that reflection can provide them a really useful feedback, and maybe it's part of our research that we have to engage them to this process of reflection. That they have to get used to this kind of reflection. So this is the final question that we have, and that we are working on. And for instance, in that case, we are now in other 2 studies that are trying to simplify all the visualizations, because we want somehow that they go to the website and they get engaged with the visualization or something like that. So we started with a table, and finally we want to do a really small widget, like in the previous presentation they did, with a really simple semaphore, red light traffic, that you can see, okay, I am going well, I am not going well, compared with the average, and so on. So, yes, it is all. So if you want to follow us to have more information, feel free to follow us on the net. Thank you. Yeah, basically, I mean, even as a funny part of the experiment, I mean, at the beginning, for instance, in the first iteration, we had 36 students. In principle, we had to do it with all the students, but we cannot force it to use our application because it's against the law. So the funny part is that at the end, we I mean, we installed the software in the computers of the lab. So they did, I think at least half of them, they did the trick to bring the laptops saying that they wanted to work at home with all the software. So they skip the part of tracking. So at the end, we have only half of the students working on that. And basically, what they told us is that they don't really feel comfortable with that other students or even us, we can look at them, what they are doing. Because for them, they are enough autonomous for doing the work. But yes, after our observations, we see that this is not true. I mean, basically, the person who was more rejecting this kind of tracking were the people who was not so really active during the course. So it's difficult to manage with that, but still trying to find the final solution for that.
So to be able to use the software on the lab computers and for those students who did elect to be tracked, was there some sort of review process that you had to go through in your institution, like a review board, to be able to collect that data and analyze this? Or was it just part of your normal course operation?
It's not part of the normal operation, but we didn't go through a review process. I mean, we let them know that they could stop and start the tracking. They feel free to do it. For sure, we are giving them some pressure because we are saying that it's a part of our research, but they could do it if they want, but nothing else.
And just a last follow-up. So the student who was using Facebook, do you imagine any interventions coming from this or making this tracking part of the course grade, something like that, so that if a student is off task that you could intervene and counsel them, or is it just part of helping them become self-reflective and self-monitoring?
Yeah, I mean, we are not so interested in intervening in the process. I mean, we assume as normal that they can use Facebook. I mean, the problem would be if half of the class they are in Facebook, but maybe in that case, yes, we can do something, but in principle, they had this dashboard for them. We didn't do a dashboard for us. So, because we were trying that they get free of this feeling that we are observing them. We don't want to observe them. I mean, we want to provide them tools for reflecting on their own activity and nothing else. But we didn't really get this goal.
Yeah. Thanks for the presentation. That was really good. One of the problems I'm struggling with, so I don't know if there's an answer, but the goal is reflection or some sort of learning impact. And at the early iterations, you're showing them data that's not their own data, which would help reflection. Mm-hmm. Is there any way to help close that between the two, between the fake data and the goal early on? Did you find any way to methodologically help them, put them into a scenario or?
I mean, in that case, I think that was pretty close the scenario that we were using with the fake data, because in that case, fake data, we were using fake data of our daily work. So we also work with computers. We also work with programming. So we were trying to really simulate or emulate the real scenario that they were working on. So. But even though I think usefulness, I think at the end we saw that usefulness was quite good, but they have still problems to really figure it out because they cannot link with their own activity, because if they see what was their activity and the visualization, they can link it somehow. But with our information, no, they couldn't. So it's a bit, yes, struggling on something. It's really difficult to fix it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.